you are thinking about this way too rationally. He said, this is not how human beings think. The reason that tactic is actually extremely effective is because if you can depict somebody as engaging in personally shameful behavior, or if you can make other people perceive them as psychologically unstable or even sick, you make them so radioactive that you not only distract attention away from their revelations, the old classic case of kill the messenger in order to suffocate the message, but you actually make people want nothing to do with them. Not only them personally, but the fruits of what they have decided to do. So if you're thinking about Dan Ellsberg's psychosexual secrets, you're going to not want to think about the Pentagon Papers or talk about it because the whole thing makes you uncomfortable. It makes you seem like it's a realm of psychological disturbance. And if you go and look at how people who have been whistleblowers or dissenters have been treated, you will find that behavior over and over, that tactic over and over and over again. One of the most, I think, compelling examples that I can remember is a recent one, which was in 2011, when WikiLeaks released the Iraq war logs, which were really unbelievably profound. I mean, they really did unveil extremely vivid details of American atrocities and war crimes in Iraq beyond what anyone had previously known. All kinds of torture and slaughter of civilians by not only the US but the Iraqi forces that we were training. It was one of the most significant leaks in all of American history. And on the day that those leaks were reported by the New York Times, which was partnering with WikiLeaks, and you can go and look at it on the front page of the New York Times, there was an article pretty prominent that said, WikiLeaks documents reveals American atrocities or civilian deaths or whatever in Iraq. But then right next to it, getting at least equal play, if not even bigger play, was an article by the New York Times pro-war reporter John Burns that was all about the odd personality quirks of Julian Assange. It was right next to it as though it was at least equally important. And the article was all devoted to depicting Julian Assange as this bizarre paranoid freak. It talked about how before he would turn the corner, he would send somebody to look to see if somebody was lurking there. I don't know, I mean, to me, Julian Assange was in the middle of this massive national security leak. The idea that he should check around the corner before crossing it seems pretty rational to me, not really indicative of paranoia. But the New York Times was so intent on depicting him as this bizarre, freakish, paranoid, mentally unstable person that they even talked about his personal sanitary habits. The fact that his clothes were rumpled, that he supped on sofas, and his hair was unkempt. And 2 weeks later, the longtime executive editor of the New York Times, Bill Keller, broke the story that Julian Assange's socks are so dirty that they actually crumple up around his ankles. This was the way the New York Times treated this extraordinary disclosure, because he had stepped out, Julian Assange did, so far from what is considered permissible, had become this symbol of dissent, that he had to be maligned as being psychologically ill. And then the same thing was done to his very heroic source, Chelsea Manning, who and lots of other media outlets worked very hard to convince us all to believe had done what she did, not out of any act of conscience, but because she was struggling with what they were calling her gender disorders, or because she had tension with her father, or because she was gay in the middle of a war zone, and that led to all kinds of psychological burdens. And if you read the chats that she actually engaged in with the person who ultimately turned her in, what you find is a model of rational, stable thought. Whatever else you think of her, she had a very cogent idea of why she was doing what she did, which is that she had joined the military thinking that her government was acting patriotically both in general and in the war, and had discovered a whole range of abuses of which she was previously unaware and did not want on her conscience the idea that she could have notified her fellow citizens of what the government was doing, and instead decided that she was going to leak this information in order, in her words, to trigger reform and debate democratically about what should be done about this. A model of rational and conscience-driven choice. And yet you see over and over the very same kinds of rational, conscience-driven choices being depicted as mentally ill, or the byproduct of mental disturbances. And I think there's two really important things that go on when that happens, when that framework arises. One is that The message that gets sent whenever dissidents are reflexively equated with the mentally ill, or whenever that kind of dissidence is attributed to mental disorders and mental instability, the premise that gets reinforced is that the prevailing order, the status quo, is so fundamentally good that nobody would ever possibly dissent meaningfully from it unless they were mentally ill. That's the only possible explanation. And the converse of that is equally reinforced, which is that if you want to be somebody considered to be healthy and sane and mentally stable, you will acquiesce to rather than dissent from the prevailing order. That is a very powerful message to continuously reinforce over and over. But there's a second, and I think probably more subtle, though more insidious premise that is being reinforced whenever this dynamic gets bolstered, that dissonance is synonymous with mental illness. And the idea is here that the only people who have psychological motives at play driving what they're doing are the people who object to and confront and resist fundamental injustice. Only when somebody does something and steps out like that do we start asking, what is it about them psychologically that has driven them to do what they've done? The underlying premise is that there is no psychological motive to compliance and to conformity and to acquiescence. That is just the normal, natural state of psychological being. The only time that psychological motives come into play is when somebody dissents. And what that premise really is designed to do is to completely obfuscate a crucial debate. It's really designed to resolve a crucial debate without even acknowledging that that debate exists. And that debate is the following question. What is truly the psychologically disturbed or unstable thing to do? Is it to work within a military system that is engaging in systematic war crimes in secret and help conceal that and acquiesce to it and help perpetrate it? Or is it to object to it and disclose it and uncover it so that people around the world actually know that it's happening? Or what is the psychologically healthy choice? Is it to work within this system of secret, indiscriminate mass surveillance and tell nobody that it's going on so they have no idea what's happening to their privacy and can't democratically debate whether they want to live in a world where that happens? Or is it to blow the whistle on it and tell the world what's taking place? What is the psychologically healthy thing to do in the face of a government lying to its own citizens for 10 years about the winnability of a brutal, savage war? Is it to stay within the military system and adhere to what you're told or your oaths to keep it all secret? Or is it to take 8 volumes of government documents that prove these lies and give it to the New York Times? That is really the fundamental question that we ought to be having, that this instant reflexive equation of dissent and whistleblowing with mental illness continuously prevents us from having. So, I just want to talk about one more myth briefly that has sort of been at the center of the last year of discussion. And this myth has to do with what NSA and government, US government defenders and loyalists of the Obama administration have been saying for a full year is the reason that they have assembled and expanded the system of mass surveillance. And the reason they tell us that they have expanded the system of mass surveillance and implemented it so aggressively is because the people who are running it have this deep, internal, almost uncontrollable desire to protect all of you from really dangerous things, especially from the terrorists. That's the claim that gets made over and over. And there are so many reasons why anybody at this point who is willing to stand up and say that in public ought to have their credibility instantly and permanently obliterated. This idea of invoking the word terrorism over and over as a fear-mongering tactic has been what has justified almost everything the US government has done over the last 12 years, from invading and destroying a country of 26 million people in an aggressive invasion, to erecting a system of worldwide torture around the world, to kidnapping people off the streets with no due process and sending them to the worst human rights abusers on the planet, to putting them in cages in an island in the middle of the sea, thousands of miles from their home for more than a decade, without so much as bothering to charge them with any crime, to ending the lives of all sorts of women and children and innocent men in predominantly Muslim countries over and over and over again through the use of drones. It's just the word terrorism that gets invoked in every single instance as a debate-ending mechanism. It really is a word that almost has no meaning. And yet it's used to justify essentially everything. And that's the only tactic that has been used in this debate over and over and over again. And there's so many reasons why we shouldn't even take it seriously, beginning with the fact that almost every story that we've been able to report on about what the NSA is actually doing has nothing manifestly to do with any of that. Whether it's spying on democratically elected allies like the president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, or the chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, or spying on economic conferences that are arranged regionally with our allies, or spying on oil companies like the Brazilian oil giant Petrobras, or subjecting entire populations to indiscriminate surveillance on the grounds of absolutely no suspicion. Over and over, we've learned of all kinds of actual espionage activities that plainly have nothing to do with the ostensible objective that they claim. But there's a much better reason and easier reason to know that that claim that we're just doing this to protect you from the terrorists is deceitful, that it's a lie. And that reason is that through a great stroke of luck, we just so happen to have tens of thousands of NSA documents where when they thought nobody was listening, they described what their mission actually is. And the phrase, the motto of this agency is collect it all. That is their motto. Not collect the terrorist communications or collect some or collect a lot. It's collect it all. And you know, the NSA is criticized by a lot of people, including me, and they get bashed all the time in lots of different ways, and I think a lot of that is deserved, but they sometimes do deserve credit and gratitude. And in this instance, I have to say they do deserve credit, and they definitely have my gratitude for creating documents that are unbelievably clear about what their real mission is. And these documents, many of which I published in this book and then put online simultaneously with the book's publication, not only say collect it all over and over and over again. There's one document that I think is my favorite NSA document I've ever seen because of its clarity in terms of just how comprehensive it is. At the top of the document, it says, our new collection posture. This is the NSA describing their new collection posture, and right underneath is this really ugly though helpful circle that has 6 points on it. And the 6 points each has a different phrase that elaborates on this collect it all mandate. And so you go around clockwise around the circle, and at the top it says collect it all, and then it says sniff it all, exploit it all, process it all, partner it all, and then the last one is know it all. That is the institutional mandate of the NSA. They are collecting billions and billions of telephone calls and emails every single day from populations of nations all over the world, including our own. It is a system of ubiquitous spying. It is the largest and most invasive system of suspicionless surveillance ever created in human history. The goal of the NSA, their goal, is the complete elimination of privacy in the digital age. And I don't mean that melodramatically, and I don't mean it as hyperbole. Their mission is to collect and store, and when they want, monitor and analyze every single communication event by and between human beings that takes place electronically, meaning by telephone or over the internet. That is their real goal. And when you confront them with that evidence, they are no longer able to sustain these myths. I did this debate a month ago or so, and it's online. You can go see this part I'm about to tell you about with Michael Hayden, the General Michael Hayden, the former NSA and CIA director under George Bush, who actually implemented and then oversaw the expansion of many of these programs. And he stood up before I was able to speak and did what I knew he was going to do, what he's been doing for a year, what they've all been doing for a year, which he's put on this very kind of grandfatherly, friendly face, and he said, you know, look, we're just struggling like all of you to keep our children safe, and we live in this really dangerous world, and you know, I know there's a lot of claims about how we want everything, but I promise you we don't. We're only interested in knowing what terrorists who want to blow up this auditorium are actually saying. And so when I was able to stand up and talk about and describe that document that I just described to you, collect it all, sniff it all, exploit it all, know it all, what else was there really left for him to say? And then he stood up and he said, well, I think what I really need to get you to understand is that when we say collect it all, we don't mean collect it all. And so, I think one of the reasons why this debate has resonated to the extent that it has is because there's such little faith in most public institutions for good reasons, including journalistic ones. And so if I were just able to report, or anybody were just able to report, that the NSA were engaged in these activities and didn't have the documents, it would definitely not resonate to the extent that it has, not even close. The reason that it has resonated is because you don't have to take my word for it or anybody else's word for it. You can go and look at the documents themselves, and that really does end the debate about what the NSA is really about. Now, I just want to leave the realm of myth for a minute. I want to talk a little bit about what is another really important reason for me why I wanted to write this book. And that was the opportunity to talk about privacy in a kind of contemplative and deliberative way. It is an issue, it is a value that's really difficult to talk about. Certainly if you go on television and have 6 minutes on some crappy cable news show, it's impossible to talk about it meaningfully. And so writing this book was a way that I really wanted to kind of examine what this debate really is about at its core, which is privacy, and the reason why privacy matters so fundamentally to who we are as human beings, and to what it means when we talk about individual freedom. And it's actually a difficult argument to make. It is not an easy thing to do, to articulate it, even if you passionately believe in it. And the reason is that people have a very easy time on a visceral level understanding why other values are immediately compelling to them. Like the ability to feed their children, or to have health care, or a job. Privacy tends, when we think about it briefly and fleetingly, to be more remote and more ethereal. And yet I think it's something that all of us instinctively crave as an essential part of who we are. And so the ability to sort of articulate the reasons why was something I really wanted to do in this book. And the typical claim that gets made to dismiss the value of privacy and to say the reasons why we need not value it or need not care when it's violated is some certain one that you've heard many, many times before, which is there are these really bad people on the planet and they're doing really bad things, and those people want to hide what they're doing because the things they're doing are bad. I, on the other hand, am not one of those bad people. I'm not doing bad things. I, therefore, don't have anything to hide. I don't care if people know what it is that I'm doing. This mindset was expressed in its purest, and I think most repugnant form, by Eric Schmidt, the longtime CEO of Google, who was asked in an interview in 2008 about all of the different ways that his company is profoundly invading people's privacy by making all sorts of personal information and information about their activities available publicly. And what he said, and this is more or less verbatim, was he said in a very kind of aggressive and snide way, well, to the interviewer he said, well, ultimately what I would say to you is if you're doing something or saying something that you don't want other people to know about, that's probably a really good sign that you shouldn't be doing it. Now, this is the same Eric Schmidt who, less than a year after that, demanded or mandated or ordered every employee at Google to cease talking to the online digital magazine CNET, because CNET had published this expose about Eric Schmidt and all of these details about his personal life using information available from Google.